am I willing to go on the record and say that officially, possibly, this might be my favorite episode of MCU Disney Plus TV to ever exist? Yeah. I'm that person. I'm gonna do it. Hey y'all, today we are reviewing episode 9, the finale of She-Hulk, which was so well titled. So whose show is this? Gosh, my mind is boggled. I watched this multiple hours ago and I just cannot stop thinking and raving about it. This has just blown my love for this show out of the absolute water, and you guys already know that I'm biased. So if you don't like what I'm gonna say, where the direction of this is heading, just click off now. The beginning of this episode really had me concerned because we all know that the MCU TV shows thus far have kind of been historic for fumbling the bag in the last episode. This episode kind of put us in an interesting spot at the very beginning. Jen loses her job after her outburst as She-Hulk. She's actually in Blonsky's cell, having to accept a plea deal. She's living back at home with her parents. Anything that has gone right for her this season has now been completely taken away from her, and all progress for Jen and She-Hulk kind of having this symbiotic relationship has disappeared. And I thought that was really interesting because that's very much where we found ourselves at the beginning of this show, and so I really liked that full circle moment. But as we started to get more and more into the Intelligentsia timeline and Nikki and Pug kind of doing their investigation, I just was really kind of losing it, and I kept noticing Jen was making those fourth wall breaking comments, and I was like, okay, they've got to do something crazy, right? Something's gonna happen. But I did not expect any of this.
Yeah, they had us the first half, I'm not gonna lie.
I'm not gonna be able to articulate this well, but part of the reason I wasn't enjoying where the beginning of this episode was going with was very much what Jen said. This Hulk blood serum felt like a repeat of the Super Soldier serum, so it felt like I was watching Falcon and Winter Soldier again, which worked for Falcon and Winter Soldier, but it didn't work for this show. And I also kind of hated the fact that the big bad of the She-Hulk storyline, although I appreciated that it wasn't world ending, was basically just a bunch of misogynistic Reddit commenters. I'm not calling people on Reddit misogynistic. I'm just saying that in this world, these people who run Intelligentsia are all just like jerks who hate She-Hulk. It just felt so unclever for the show. And then on top of it, it felt like they were almost proving the Intelligentsia people's point of that She-Hulk is so lesser of a character that the only bad guy you could come up with for her was a bunch of misogynistic who didn't think that she deserved her powers. And then this show did an absolute freaking mind-blowing thing. Like, the term mind-blowing should be reserved for moments like this, because I, for the last 15 to 20 minutes of this episode, could not process a thought, could not speak other than just excited facial expressions and just like freaking the flip out. Like, I have not felt that complete mind excitement adrenaline takeover of my brain since we saw John Krasinski in Multiverse of Madness.
What?
Oh my gosh, I think this was what this show needed. It came out and went out with an absolute bang. An absolute bang. This show hasn't necessarily utilized Jen's fourth wall breaking, self-aware that she's a comic book character, a character in the MCU capabilities to the extent that she should. And this episode just absolutely said, here's the bar, we're gonna exceed it. Of course, you get the writer's room, which funnily enough, you get to see Jessica Gao, who's the creator of the show. You get to see a lot of actually recognizable faces if you've been watching She-Hulk red carpets and like behind the scenes type stuff. So I absolutely love that. And we break into the world of Disney and she says, I'm gonna go find Kevin. And I absolutely love the thing I have loved more than absolutely anything beyond the cameos, between the legal procedural comedy aspect of the show, is the way that the show has an absolute finger on the pulse of what the MCU fan community discourse is like. The way that this episode was able to talk about the current state of MCU complaints, issues, following a formula, being less than what they could be, not hitting a potential, getting messy, having this forced plot intersection of a finale. And this show addressed all of that in like a 20-minute period. And I think the way that this show is able to talk about the failings of the MCU, of some of its shortcomings, while ironically being the show that a lot of criticisms have been slung at the show, like for having the poor CGI, which of course this episode addresses. I think that's what makes it so brilliant, is it's like it knows exactly where it sits amongst the filmography of the MCU. And I also have to commend this show for its incredible referencing not only of modern Hulk history with Mark Ruffalo referencing the Incredible Hulk, or not being able to say that full name, or that Bruce Banner used to be played by Edward Norton, was a completely different person. The show's knocked it out of the park with those references. But then in this beginning of this episode, kind of in our like setup for what Jen's life is like now, which was a great nice break from last episode being like the cliffhanger that it was the referencing to the Incredible Hulk TV show back in the 70s. But I thought that was incredible. Like the shot for shot really joked around with what that TV show was and what the history of the Hulk was. This show just has such rich comic and Marvel history in it that I just absolutely adored. Last but not least, of course, I have to talk about basically the last 10 minutes of the episode. And going off of like the great discourse that the show was able to have about itself and the Marvel Cinematic Universe was the reference to Kevin Feige as an algorithm bot that is just completely making almost perfect superhero content. Absolutely freaking hysterical. We have the reference to daddy issues being a theme throughout the MCU, which I thought was hilarious. We've been a little too light on usage of Matt Murdock jokes, which was hilarious. And the fact that he came back, never say never, ladies. I don't think he's coming back, but I guess you never know. Never say never, ladies and gentlemen. Justin Bieber and Jaden Smith were right in that song, truly. And then we have the reference to the CGI, like, is it most expensive? Is it cheaper for budget friendly if I like transition back? And it was like, no, but you gotta have the camera cut away because that's something I've even critiqued the show on. Just great that it can like make it a joke within the show. I also love the fact when she's coming down the hallway to Kevin Feige and she's fighting off the guards, that looks exactly like Black Widow's introduction in Iron Man 2 when she's in the hallway and she absolutely takes out some of the guards. Like, fantastic. Even the joke, the VFX artists have moved on to another project and playing part of like the Black Panther score. 10 out of 10 stars. I just was absolutely mentally losing it. And then there's of course like the fact that Matt Murdock shows back up at the end and then he's like hanging out in LA and they're like maybe dating, which I kind of loved. Also, would Foggy and Jennifer not get along so incredibly well? Because they would. Don't tell me otherwise. And also the fact that Hulk's son shows up. Last but not least, I think the thing that was most important about this episode, because when I thought back to it, I was like, well, the beginning does kind of suck because if anyone was really invested in this Hulk blood storyline and this intelligentsia storyline, they might be a little disappointed that kind of once Jen comes back into the fourth wall, is put back up, they're just arrested and taken away and Emil Blonsky gets taken away and like there's kind of nothing more that comes from that storyline just doesn't really matter anymore. Some people might say, well, that was just a waste of a couple episodes. This has been like a great example of like a person versus self, like character versus self type antagonistic relationship, or like the struggle for the character has really been Jen versus She-Hulk and how to make that a symbiotic relationship and how she really gains agency quite literally with controlling her story by the end of this season. At the beginning, she's really just a lawyer who's out of work because she's She-Hulk and there's this public thing that happens to her, and then she even loses agency when she can become She-Hulk because she's kind of demanded to be this public figure and doesn't really get to control her private life or who she is publicly. And in this finale, we see her achieve that agency by literally breaking the fourth wall and changing that part of her story, but also like getting to a point where she accepts there's no really difference between Jen and She-Hulk. Like, she is both at the same time always, and that was something I absolutely loved. Tell me what you thought about this episode of She-Hulk, this finale. If you want to watch more of my content, you can check out these videos here. You can subscribe with this little button of my face right here, and I will see you in my very next video. Peace out, everybody. Hulk smash.